Greetings, Embers, to the newbies and to the peekaboos. This is Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. If you all would do me the honor and wish everyone here on your screen a very happy birthday for the month of December. Thank you all so much for going over to the community tab and listing your birthday. From Phoenix to you, I hope it's your best birthday yet and you enjoy it. Also listed here on the screen are the elite members of Back to Ashes. Thank you all so much. You are the pillars that hold this channel up. Without further ado, it is now time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from those ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Middle of Nowhere Stories. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. I'll read the first story, there will be an ad. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. Disclaimer, this video is for educational and entertainment purposes. One late night at around 3 a.m., I was sitting around my home playing on the PC, watching movies, playing video games, etc., when I happened to notice I was out of cigarettes. The only thing open that late at night is our local gas station, not too far from my home, but still, it's easier to go with a car. I took my keys and locked my house and went to the gas station. I live in a small European country, which is the most safe country on the planet, but it's still in the middle of nowhere, and still, that doesn't mean that some bad things don't happen here and there. When you exit from the suburban area, where I live, you need to take a right so you can take the main road. After that, you just go straight for about a half a kilometer and then go left for another half kilometer to get to the gas station. About halfway, I noticed some girl on the sidewalk. I usually drive slower at night because at that time, a lot of people would speed and go on red lights during the nighttime, walking faster than usual. It looked like she was panicked, and I noticed two guys behind her who were like 10 feet away, maybe less, pointing at her and doing some hand gestures towards her. They gave me really creepy vibes. As I was getting close to the girl, I noticed she had a very scared look on her face, like she was about to cry, but didn't cry. So I pulled over close to her and said very quietly, "Are you in trouble?" And she just looked at me, nodded with a head nod. I told her to get in my car, and she did. I told her I'm going to the gas station to get some cigarettes, but I will take her home as soon as I finish buying said cigarettes. She thanked me 100 times over. I asked if she wanted to go report it to the police, but she said only to take her home. I went to the gas station, bought my cigarettes and a bottle of water for her. She was clearly in fear. I took her home after that. We passed the same street where those two guys followed her, but those guys were nowhere to be found, which leaves me imagining, what would have happened if I hadn't ran out of cigarettes that night? I've been meaning to tell my story and just wanted to share it, so here goes. It was Thanksgiving 2011, and I was celebrating at my grandparents' farm in the little town of Seville, Florida. It's north of DeLand. I had had way too much to eat that holiday and was about to leave to drive back to my school in Tallahassee. I stopped at the one little gas station in town to fill up before getting on the highway. It was basically in the middle of nowhere. I had just finished filling up when a lady walked up to me. She was really ratty looking with crazy blonde dyed hair. But this is the backwoods of Florida, so no judgment. There were really kind people who look like that in those parts. She started talking to me about her car and how it ran out of gas. She pointed to an old junker parked over near the convenience store, and if I could possibly give her some cash to get home. I usually don't say yes to these things like that, but it was Thanksgiving weekend, so I was feeling extra generous. I told her that I'd be happy to fill up her car a little bit just to get her home. Then it started getting weird. She kept insisting I give her cash and that the car was so empty she couldn't drive it to a pump. I don't know why I didn't leave right then and there, but again, I was in a very good mood. I told her if she had a gas can, I would put some gas in it for her, but I didn't feel comfortable just giving her cash. She kept objecting and eventually went over and pulled a gas can from her car. I started filling it up. She put her hand on me and said, "Do you have a girlfriend?" I told her no politely. She said she wanted to pay me back somehow for the gas and asked if I wanted to come back to her place. I told her no, less politely. She kept touching my shoulder, thanking me, and then offered me a blowjob behind the station. So I stopped the gas pump, got into my car, and left her there with the gas can. I called my mom a little later and told her about the creepy, sleazy encounter. She paused and asked me if this lady had ratty blonde hair and looked like she was on drugs or something. I confirmed that yes, that was what she looked like, and how could she know about it? This lady was apparently all over the news. She was a prostitute in town and had been at a party earlier. An exchange had gone south, and her baby had been kidnapped by a client of hers and left under a bush in town. She hadn't even bothered to call the police about the missing child until later. They were both arrested and charged. Well, I can provide the news stories if anyone needs proof. Talk about one crazy Thanksgiving. Five or 6 years ago, I had a really strange encounter as a teen that I have never been able to explain or make sense of. If anyone has any reasonable explanations for this story, please let me know. This story takes place in Raleigh, North Carolina. There is a nature reserve area near my old apartment that I used to frequent with friends that became our official hangout and smoke spot. The nature reserve is called Shank Forest. The area is owned and managed by North Carolina State University and is home to some of veterinary school horses. It also operates as a teaching and research site for the university's forest management program. The land itself has an interesting history prior to it being utilized for university purposes, as there was a prison farm on the land pre-1930s. When visiting this area, even prior to this experience, my friend and I would always joke about how the land had a strange energy or feel to it. In the parking area of the reserve, there was a small graveyard in it. In the parking area of the reserve, there was a small graveyard and abandoned house, which certainly further contributes to the interesting vibes. However, I have never felt scared or uncomfortable in the place and would often go to the area alone. One night, I was about to meet up with my friend at the nature reserve park. She was getting off work that night, and I ended up beating her to the park. While waiting for her, I parked my car off to the side of the road and turned it around to face the direction in which you could enter the park area. Behind me was the graveyard, and I could see the area directly well in my rearview mirror and left side mirror. It is important to mention that my car was the only car there, and that there were no other humans in sight. The time was just past 7 in the middle of nowhere in October, and sun was almost completely set and it was starting to get dark outside. After arriving to the park, I sat in my car for a few minutes on my phone trying to kill time while waiting for my friend. After sitting there for a moment, something caught my eye in the side mirror of my car. In the graveyard area behind my vehicle, there was a small fire that had started on the ground. My immediate reaction was to get out of the car and to stomp out the flames, and that is exactly what I did. I found it a bit odd that this fire had started seemingly out of nowhere, but presumed that someone had tossed a cigarette out just before I had arrived. The fire was in an area where there were dry leaves on the ground, so this was a plausible explanation at the time. After stomping the small fire out, I got back into my car and continued scrolling on my phone. It was almost completely dark outside at this point, and the sun had gone beneath the horizon. Again, something caught my eye in the side mirror of my car. The fire had seemingly reappeared instantaneously. I immediately presumed that I had failed to put out the first time, and got out of my vehicle once more to try to put out the flames. Upon getting out of my car, I quickly realized that this fire was separate from the first one that I had put out. It had started approximately a foot behind where the charred spot was in the leaves from the first fire. After realizing that the ground had spontaneously caught fire, not once, but 2 times, in a graveyard and at night, I started to get a little creeped out and sped walked back to my car to leave. I didn't bother putting out the second fire. Just as I put the car into drive, I glanced back in my rearview mirror to witness a third fire spontaneously start just behind the second fire, of which was still burning. This time, I saw the fire begin with my very own eyes. I sped off and left the park, as this whole situation made me quite uncomfortable and confused. The next time that I returned to the area after this experience, the ground was still charred in 3 places, in a perfectly vertical line. This occurrence was not a figment of my imagination or a delusion, and I have never heard of or experienced anything like this in the years after this. Ever since I had this experience, I have been trying to come up with a reasonable explanation of how this could have happened, but I have been entirely unable to do so. There were no other humans around, and with the sun being down, there isn't a plausible way that these fires could have just been brush fires started by direct sunlight. I'm not religious and do not actively practice spirituality, but I feel like these spontaneous fires were a sign that I was unwelcome there, or at least at that time. The entire experience has left me confused for years. And if anyone has a scientific explanation or theory to how this could happen, I would love to hear it. Here's a quick side note. This doesn't really pertain to my story, but is something that I find to be rather sad and creepy at the same time. 2 years after I had this experience, there was an execution-style murder committed in the exact graveyard where I had this experience. This was very upsetting to my community, as we all considered our neighborhood to be very safe, and nothing like this had taken place in the year prior. As of last year, this land around the nature reserve has become developed. There was previously no develops around the area whatsoever, and the dirt road that I experienced my story on is now paved. The abandoned home on the property has since been demolished, and now there is a massive office facility that has been constructed next to the reserve. I wanted to include this information as I want to link the park's website for anyone who is interested in the story to reference, as an explanation for how the park is now different than how it was when I had my experience years ago. It used to be more remote and was not nearly as well known by hikers and nature enjoyers prior to the development of the surrounding area. To conclude, I wanted to mention that myself and others have had other strange experience at that same site as well. But this experience is the most notable one of them all. This next story has 3 parts. Out back of my neck of the woods is an old dirt road. It's hard to access unless you know how to take a turn down another old road that runs around the back of a coal mine I work at. Keep in mind, we're in the middle of nowhere here. Anyhow, if you follow that old road until you get to a T intersection, you can either turn right out to Hell Creek or left, which will take you out to Mount Coulon. Now, Mount Coulon isn't much of a town anymore. It's an outback pub, and that's it. There used to be a town, but everyone up and left once the railroad line got moved to the coast. That was the only reason the town existed for so long, or for as long as it did. It wasn't the start of a town, though. Way back in the early 1900s, gold was found in them there hills by a prospector named Thomas Coulon. He staked his claim and settled there with his family. Some local aboriginals found him and his family living on their land and weren't too happy about it. So they attacked his home, throwing rocks through the windows and antagonizing him. Well, Thomas went out and shot the lot of them all dead. Then, in a fit of grief over what he had done, sat down on his porch and blew his own brains out all over the wall behind him. Fast forward to the year of 2021. I was working out at Hell Creek Mine at the time on the maintenance crew. I've had a big 7 nights of 7-hour shifts and had very little sleep. I had left my mining camp the following afternoon, still not feeling the best, but set out for the long drive back home to Miranda. Anyhow, dusk came along, then nightfall. I was driving for what seemed like forever, trying to make my way back home. I was constantly looking out for the turn off on the old back road that ran up behind Goonyella Mine, but it never came. I kept on driving and driving. Hours went by. I was on a very unfamiliar road. It started to bend and twist and turn all over, and narrowed to the point that my little Kia Rio could barely get by without scratching the sides on branches of old looming trees hanging over the road. I was definitely lost. So I pulled over to check my Google Maps. No signal, of course. I was so confused. Did I miss a turn? I thought maybe it's a little further up, so I pressed on and kept driving. Then, out of nowhere, I see an old and worn sign off to the left of me on the side of that old dirt road. Mount Coulon, 15K. I thought, okay, yep, I've gone way too far out in the sticks. Better turn around. Before I could, though, I saw off to my right the entrance to what looked like a cemetery, with an old and rusty archway, and above the archway was in rusty wrought iron lettering, Betsy's Rest. Well, my curiosity got the better of me, so I veered in there to have myself a quick squiz. Sure as shit, there was a road that went in a giant U-shape around the old cemetery, full of tombstones. Generations of cattle farmers and jackaroos, etc., who all must have worked on the various stations in the area. It gave me the spooks really bad, so I got out of there quick, made my way back to the old back road. I kept heading back from where I came, hoping and praying I'll find the bloody T section. Over an hour had passed, and then my worst fear happened. The fuel light flickered onto my dashboard. Shit. I'm driving on this road in the absolute middle of nowhere. It's now midnight. No one will probably find me for days if I ran out of fuel. I was absolutely shitting myself. This is the outback of Australia. You run out of fuel, water, food in the outback, you've just signed your death certificate. Done and dusted. All I had was a couple sandwiches I took from the camp mess hall and a bottle of water. Better than nothing, but not enough to last a couple of days stranded on the side of an old back road with no power signal. So I keep cruising along, being extremely careful not to go too quickly or over-accelerate around all the twists and turns. As I'm driving along this lonely road, I see a shadow out of the corner of my eye. I think nothing of it, though, keeping focused on the road ahead. Then I hear it, swooping and whooshing noises above my car. What? I look up and see what I can only describe as a giant bat creature with red eyes flying directly above my car. It startles me and makes me accelerate at a rapid rate. Yet it's flying overhead, gliding effortlessly and keeping in pace with me. I'm watching my speedometer reaching neck-breaking speeds, and I'm bouncing all over the road and bumpy dirt road while this creature glides down to my driver's side window, looks inside at me, and grimaces. Then, just as it does, it flies up and disappears into the night air as quickly as it had appeared. I floored that old clunker of a car of mine until my heart leapt with joy at the sign of life in that desolate hellscape. I saw the Goonyella mine, CHPP's light cut through the vast and empty void of darkness. I knew then and there that I was within 10 to 15 kilometers of the intersection and turnoff back home. And sure as shit, I found it. Anyhow, I managed to get all the way back home and very grateful that my clunker ran on an oil rag and the vapors in my tank that kept me alive. I told my partner at the time all about the nightmare I had been through, as she had been expecting me home the evening prior, and it was now 6 a.m. in the morning. My phone was full of missed calls from her, for which I apologized profusely for. I hadn't even thought to check my phone, as I had no signal for the better part of the entire journey. Well, this is part one. On to part two. Months had passed. I kept having reoccurring nightmares about that vile winged creature. It had entered my dreams. I awoke one night sweating in bed. My heart was racing. My partner asked, "What's wrong?" Again? I had been waking her up late at night when I would have this horrible nightmare. The whole situation had impacted me. The desolate hellscape would re-emerge in the dark nights, plagued by the old outback road menacing my demise, with the off chance I would make one wrong move and come undone escaping that creature. Something had to be done, and I knew what I needed to do. You see, I'm a man that will openly admit that I can't overcome anything in life unless I face it head on. That's the only way I know. No use sticking your head in the sand and pretending things will just go away. So I spoke with my partner, and after much discussion, we both agreed that we would go back and investigate the back road at Mount Coulon and investigate the town itself. And to really drive the nail in, we were going to do it at night. I really needed answers. I needed to know what lay at the end of that old road, and whatever else I may have missed on my first misadventure. We set out at 6:30 p.m. and headed for the old back road, which now is inaccessible. You can go take a look for yourself, but the mine has shut the gate as it runs along the inside of the mine's boundary. Anyhow, we were driving my partner at the time's new Mitsubishi Mirage. It was a rally beast of a car. Yeah, I was joking about that. But it had all the kit we needed for a long drive, and we made sure we left prepared. Esky full of food, water and snacks, my toolkit in case of a breakdown, torches, first aid kit, two-way radio, battery pack for phones, and two-way radio. My trusty hunting knife, which I kept in my side door compartment as if I was going out there again completely unarmed with God knows what lurking out there in the dark. The first leg of our adventure was rather fun. I felt a bit like Colin McRae taking the old dirt road that twisted and turned in all directions, slithering my way up to the T section. Once we got to the intersection, I took the left turn to head north and gradually west. The familiar road was as it was the same night I encountered the strange flying beast. Except tonight brought a slight amount of comfort, as there was a full moon in the night sky illuminating the surroundings and edges of the road. As we approached the old cemetery, I told my partner to look right. She was in awe. I asked if she wanted to go take a look, but she was too nervous about it, so I kept on driving. As the night went on, we came to the point of no return. The road became nothing more than a dirt track interspersed with sealed sections the local farmers had laid prior to and after crossing old relics of bridges. They were rusty and wrought iron, sturdy but foreboding at the same time. We crossed two of them on the stretch, one built over the coalfields railway line, heading eastward to the port. Another was over a deep ravine. The bottom was clouded by dense native plants. The road got very narrow and snaked left and right and down and up. We were in an unfamiliar territory now, and I was growing apprehensive about what I would see or find. At one point, I swore there was no road at all, but we were basically driving through a wide-open field, and I had to drive 40 kilometers per hour max to avoid any ruts or depressions in the bull dust. I was starting to think this entire trip must have been a mistake when the road then became good again to come back to dirt. A random sign appeared off to the right of the road, stating we were now deep in Aboriginal land, and that was how it would remain until the end of time itself. The drive went on and on, and on. Hours had passed. Were we any closer to our destination? For reference, I switched the car's function from Bluetooth headset to radio to scan the FM and AM for any signs of life. Nothing. I thought, well, I'll check again in an hour. An hour had passed, so I checked again. Scanning. A muffled and distorted voice emitted through our car. And then, the sweet sound of music. It was AC/DC's Highway to Hell. How befitting, I thought to myself. I said to my partner, "Right, love, check the signal on your phone now." She replied, 2 bars. She immediately checked Google Maps. I parked the car in the small spot of salvation while it loaded up. According to Google Maps, we were approximately 30 minutes away from a fork in the road. One way heading west out into the Never Never, another heading towards Mount Coulon. Good thing we checked, so we headed onwards, and sure enough, there it was, the fork in the road. No signage indicating which way to go, just one road slightly more compact than the other and wider. So we kept true to the road we were on, and then came a faint glimmer in the distance. A faint yellow light on the horizon. As we approached, the light had developed into a service station, off to the left of the dirt road, with a storefront that looked completely empty, save for a cash register on a countertop. We were now at the main intersection, the signage indicating to head right was to head towards Collinsville. To go left, out west into the Never Never. I came to a stop-off to the right shoulder of the road on the dirt patch, made by trucks that had turned here before. I checked the fuel gauge. Half a tank. I looked into the old, run-down service station, scanning the area for any other signs of life outside of the faint yellow glow of the iridescent tube lights above the old and rusted bowers that looked like they hadn't been used since the 1980s. Then I saw a figure emerging from a back room. It was a frail old woman, her hair tattered and distressed. It looked like we had woken her. The time was now 11:30 p.m. She came to a stop inside the abandoned storefront and just stood there, staring at our car. I thought, better come forwards and ask if there's any chance of fueling up. So I pulled in and rolled down my window. She came outside into the night air and approached me with a great deal of hesitation. "Excuse me, I'm so sorry if we woke you. We were just wondering if you had any fuel." She stood there glaring and studying me, her face withering from the harsh outback climate. No fuel here. You better leave. Now." Something felt really off. There was a tension between us. And so I said, "Okay, thank you. I'm so sorry. We will leave now. Thanks again anyhow, and we are so sorry again." So I wound the window up and got out of there. We drove around the old pub in the center of what was once the town. It had multiple V-double road train trucks parked all around it, almost like they were protecting the pub itself with a wall of steel and rubber in the desolate darkness. A picnic table with a tin roof cover appeared on the right of this massive loop road, the only road in the area that was sealed, and even it was rather narrow. Part 3. In Part 2, we had discovered the heart of Mount Coulon, an old outback pub, general store, post office. The most notable thing I'll say about this pub is that it had an amazing veranda. It fully encompassed the exterior ground level and was solid hardwood and varnished. Whoever owns the pub has taken great care of it to preserve it, as it's all that really remains of the town bar, the old petrol station converted into an old couple's new home. Anyhow, where do we leave off? Oh yeah, as for lighting. What lighting? This place was clearly not welcoming after dark, albeit for 2 streetlights. In the entire area, they glowed faintly, only illuminating small patches of the loop road. You definitely wouldn't want to be out here with no headlights. We did the brief tour of all that was out there, kind of thing, then made our way back towards the road back home. My partner said hold up, so I came to stop again off to the side of the road back out to Maramba. She had just discovered on Google Maps a quicker way back home. This way would take us out on that old dirt road out west into the fork in the road. However, as you continue down that road for 50 kilometers, you'll come to another fork in the road. Taking the leftward track will take us to the Goon Yellow Road, which then headed back home. "Good eye," I said to her. So on we went. The Mitsubishi ran on an oily rag too. It was only a little 4-cylinder powerhouse like my Kia Rio, so I felt confident we'd make it back. On the drive back, it was another long and slow slog. At some points, I'd have to slow to 20 kilometers per hour to make it around tight bends and twisting and turning through the roughened thoroughfare, which went between wide-open cattle farming properties. Then, at some points, the bushland would thicken around creeks and runoff areas, and you couldn't see a meter off the sides of the road. After taking the leftward turn in what was a slight fork in the road, we made our way homebound. And then it happened. A large creature came bounding out from the dense bushland and right out in front of our car. I came to an abrupt stop, and there in our headlights was a massive cow. It looked at us, then took off back into the bushland. I was a little stunned. That was close. A little too close. So on we went back home. The rest of our journey was rather mundane, to say the least. The only exception was an interesting stretch of road that had been well sealed and snaked through dense bushland. I was impressed by the craftsmanship of how well compacted it was. Then suddenly, we were back on dirt road again. Hours on, and we made it to the Goon Yellow Road. Intersections with lighting signaling the turnoffs to local mines and explosives factories that made the bomb products for them, and so on and so forth. The usual acting of the coal fields. Then we made it home, as the first light of morning emitted over the horizon. Pulling into our driveway, we both looked at each other, shrugged as if to signal. What the fuck was that all about? Then got out of the car and headed inside. It's a strange feeling out there. It's the desolation, I think. The lack of. It's what really drives the tension, I guess. Any moment can be fraught with demise, but it gave me the closure that I needed to put to rest the monsters in my head. Whatever I saw that night when I made that near-fatal misadventure will remain a mystery, and maybe that is for the best. So here's some context. I'm an 18-year-old woman working the 4 p.m. to midnight shift at a nice and clean gas station convenience store in Canada. Because the location of my workplace is right beside a highway, it is common for people to settle in the parking lot for a while, or even the entire night. What isn't common is when someone parks right outside the window beside the cash register, parallel to the building. Keep in mind this is a stop-off gas station in the middle of nowhere. It's about 11 p.m. and I'm preparing to close my shift, excited to go home and rest. Keep in mind I am only 18, I still live with my parents. A rush of customers comes and goes when I notice the car parked outside. Right beside the cash register, there is a huge window in order for the workers to look out to see the customers at the pump. Many people have parked there before, but none have ever parked parallel to the store, snuggled up to the curb. Whatever, I thought. Maybe the man or woman is just exhausted. 11:30 rolls around and the car is still parked there. I had to go outside to shut the oil shack, which happened to be right next to where the car was parked. As I closed the shack, I looked into the car to see the driver's seat reclined all the way back with a man laying back, with a smirk on his face. I rushed inside and go behind the counter, right as one of my regulars walked in. I pointed out the man in the car, joking that he's waiting for me. The regular seemed worried, telling me to call the cops. He said to stay safe. He had to get back to work. I decided against calling the cops, because the guy could have easily just been resting after a long haul. At around 11:45, I decided to call my sister because the guy was still outside. We live about 15 minutes from my workplace, a perfect amount of time for her to get there in time for closing. I told her the lowdown, which she responded that she was leaving at that moment and would be there soon. 11:48. The guy gets out of the car. Well, shit. I'm closing in less than 10 minutes, and now he decides he wants a snack. As I'm watching him, I noticed he is walking around near the pumps, staring off into the sky, later to assume he was looking for a camera. 11:50, and he walks into the store, not returning my greeting. He walks right towards the bathrooms. A couple of customers walk in, and because I was busy with them, I assume the man may have walked out without me knowing. 12:01 and my sister shows up. Thank God. But the car was still parked outside. She comes in and asks what's up, and I ask if he's in his car. She replies no. That's when my heartbeat increased. I looked at the bathroom doors, were both signs. There's 2 bathrooms, 1 men and 1 women. When vacant, the little sign will be green. When occupied and locked, the sign will be red. We're green. When the bathroom lights are on, you can see the glow from underneath the doorway. The lack of the glow made me assume there was no one in either, because the lights are motion-centered. I told my sister that there was no one in the bathrooms, so I began locking the doors and shutting off the lights. My sister, with her balls of steel, opens the women's bathroom, and who's sitting on the toilet? She closed the door and begins yelling at him that the store was closing. A couple minutes passed and he's still in there. So she pounds on the door a little bit more. It's about 12:08 now, and the creep comes out of the bathroom, grabs a cookie, buys it, and walks out. He never even looked me in the eye or spoke. He got into his car right away and hurried off. I finished locking up and met my sister at a Tom Hortons nearby. Had my sister not been there, I'm unsure what could have been the outcome of that situation. I could easily not be typing this right now. Thankfully, that day at the beginning of my shift, I put in my 2-week notice. I had to work the next night, which was uneventful, yet I was still scared to even go outside. After telling my parents and my mom, being the Criminal Minds fan, thought that man may scan the property for cameras and went into the bathroom to wait for me to go check them during the closing process of the store. He may have parked parallel for a quick getaway. I'm so glad I'm done working there. So to the creep who was waiting on me in the women's bathroom, I hope we never meet again. Me and my friend and girlfriend were staying on top of a small mountain in Yurt in North Carolina for 3 days. It was basically in the middle of nowhere. The yurt was one large cylindrical room with 2 futons and a kitchen table. 2 doors to enter the yurt off a porch that circled one half of the building, and the first door was to the north and the second door to the west. The second door was closer to the futons, and the main entrance was on the north from the futons. The first night we made dinner and fell asleep after our 9-hour drive. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. We went out hiking in the morning and had a full day. Lots of fun. We came back and I made a dinner and we passed out. That night, my girlfriend woke up and had an extreme and sudden notion that the doors needed to be locked. She got up and locked the door and went back to sleep. She claims she woke again in a sleepy daze to what looked like a black silhouette sitting at the dinner table next to the bed. She shook it off as a dream or a sleepy hallucination and went back to sleep. We went out again on our 3rd day hiking and returned at sundown. I wanted to take a time lapse of the sun retreating over the mountains, so I ran up to the top of the hill to set up a time lapse aimed down at the yurt. As I was doing this, my girlfriend and other friend were exploring a trail that I'd come into the woods of the mountain. We all went back in and I left the camera shooting. I made dinner and we ate. After that, I went to the top of the hill alone to retrieve my camera. This is where things started to get weird for me. I took a piss by my tripod, and as soon as I finished, this wave of what I can only describe as energy enveloped me. I all of a sudden had this image in my mind of something behind me in the woods, slowly approaching me, like a wall of fog or something. In my mind, I kept having this image of a strange white figure that could have been like a humanoid tree kneeling by the ground and standing up, then sitting only to repeat this action multiple times. I know this was just in my head, but it was like I could pinpoint where all of this idea was. So I grabbed my stuff and went in for the night. We all fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I awoke to a huge bang on wood that sounded like the north doors being hit. I was very tired and looked around, and neither my girlfriend or my friend on the futon 5 feet away were awake. I shrugged it off and fell back asleep. I continued to have dreams as if my visions were just floating inside the yurt, slowly panning along the inner wall, looking outside the window for hours, like I was standing in the yurt, walking around, but I had no body and there was no sound of me walking. Then I awake again to a huge bang on the other door, just 6 feet from the futon. Since my body was oriented towards it, I opened my eyes and I was immediately fixated on the door, which had a full glass window with a shade. I watched intently, looking to see if there was someone there, but there was nothing. Nope, fuck this, and shut my eyes and went back to bed. Hours pass and I wake a third time. This time I was on my side and didn't open my eyes. To my horror, I can hear a voice just outside. It was a sort of inflection more than words. It spoke in a way like a person was speaking to another. I had this notion that there were two of whatever it was, looking in as if to say, "Look, you can see them right there." I was petrified, and I looked real quickly to see the clock. It was 5:30 a.m. I once again said, "Oh, fuck that," to myself and fell back asleep. When we woke up, I said to my friend, "I don't want to alarm you, but I was hearing some fucked up shit last night." Both my friend and girlfriend said that they had also awoke to huge bangs. The weird thing is, when each one of us would hear the noise and wake up, we had seen that all the others were asleep. I don't know what this was, but I think I pissed off something by pissing on top of its mountain. This is a story my aunt told me years ago. My aunt and her family lived in a very rural and backwoods area of Lincoln County, West Virginia. She said that her father would go fox hunting periodically. He and other men would travel up into the mountains to their camp. There, they would let their dogs run or chase foxes and spend the evening talking and telling stories amongst themselves. My aunt had many siblings, was not uncommon back in the 1950s, backwoods West Virginia. Her mother decided that she would walk with several of her younger children up to her husband's, my aunt's father, camp. My aunt was one of the party. She said they walked a long way back up onto the mountain and spent a few hours relaxing and spending time with her dad. The group had such a nice time that they didn't realize it had gotten late. My aunt's father gave his wife a lantern in order for her and their kids to be able to see on their long journey down the mountain. As the group left, the lights from the fox hunters' camp eventually faded out of sight. As they walked on down the mountain, her mother noticed a small ball of light about the size of a softball coming down the mountain behind them. Thinking this was her husband needing something, She and the children stopped on the trail to wait. As they stood there, the light slowly made its way down the path and into better view. My aunt said that the closer it got, they could see that it wasn't a lantern, but a ball of light floating about 3 feet from the ground. She said once her mother realized this, she put the children in front of her and told them to run as fast as they could down the old trail that was cut into the mountain. My aunt told me that they all ran as fast as they could down that hill. She said the faster they ran, the faster the ball of light moved. My aunt said that they had finally got to where their home was and ran inside and locked the door. According to my aunt, they were all terrified. When they finally got the courage to look out the window, they saw absolutely nothing. And that, dear Embers, brings a close to these true middle-of-nowhere stories. I'd like to give a special thank you to the subscribers of Back to Ashes right here on the screen. I'd also like to give a very special shout out to those who have never experienced my channel before, and also for the peekaboos. Thank you all so much for your support, for without you, I wouldn't have a voice and this channel would not exist. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed these selections. Until next time, please take care of yourselves and stay safe out there. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good night. Peace, love, and light to you all.